borrow what you want, put back on the shelf, or keep it and give it to somebody, whatever. Okay. Also, did everybody get a chance to I don't think I see Sam and Jim on here, or Luann. Anybody need? You're on here.
Oh, I am?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you were
Explain
voluntold.
what it is, Kitty.
This is the list for the church picnic on Saturday at Tom and Claudia's house. So you're on
How are
there
Tom
too,
and
Karen.
Claudia doing? Are they still fighting that?
They're pretty much over it.
They're fighting each other? What?
No, no.
Starting a
Fighting
rumor?
a disease,
She was there Thursday.
Yeah, they're pretty much over it.
Good.
Cool.
He was sick.
Yeah. Yeah, he's better too.
Good.
They're pretty much over it.
If anybody needs directions, we still have papers here.
They've been doing a lot of preparation, trying to get their place ready.
Jojo already signed up. Okay.
Okay, we'll start over again. 2 Samuel chapter 18. 2 Samuel 18. We're going to just finish up the story here with Absalom. The narrative here of how Absalom, the war between David and Absalom, and how it goes and what happens. So let me read 2 Samuel 18. You all have your Bibles? All right. And David numbered the people that were with him, and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Notice David's organization. He was a man of war. He knew how to organize his troops. Then verse 2, it says, David sent forth a third part under Joab, a third part under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third part under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. We're not told how many people David had, but I think Josephus, one of the historian, he says he thinks there were about 4,000 men who had gathered to protect David. So David divides the group into three. This is probably one of the reasons why he won this battle, other than the fact that obviously the Lord's hand was in it. But he was a good strategist, and he knew how to fight. All right. But the people said, now this is after David says, I'm going too. The people said this, you shall not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die will they care for us. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that thou succor us out of the city. Save us. So what did they say? David wants to go along to battle, and they say, no, you're worth a lot more than the rest of us. See, they respected him as their king. And the king said unto them, what seems you best I will do. And the king stood by the gate, and all the people came out by hundreds and thousands. And the king commanded Joab and Abishai. Now this is key here. He calls his three leaders in and gives them instructions. The king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. So what did he say?
Don't hurt Absalom.
Now, don't hurt him for my sake. Deal gently with him. All right. So the people went out into the field against Israel. The battle was in the wood of Ephraim. Now, there's a little discussion as to where exactly this battle took place, but it does say the wood of Ephraim. Those are the mountains. It's a mountainous country. And there's places where it's very There's ravines and crags and things like that. It's not a flat area. This is mountainous. All right, so they're going to fight in the mountains. And that's a key there to what happens. Where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David, and there was a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. Now think, if David had about 4,000, but they killed 20,000 of the ones with Absalom, they're severely outnumbered.
Well, the next verse says the battle spread over the entire area. That day the forest claimed one people and the sword.
Yeah. So verse 8, the battles was scattered over the face of the country, so they're in the mountains. And the wood devoured more people that day than the sword. What does that mean? Well, think about it. If you're fighting,
Think they fell off the mountains?
probably, because where we picked the story up here, they're losing and they're running. What happens when you run and run into a ravine? You're being chased. Yeah. So not only were they slaughtered by just manpower, but they were also, the place they chose for this battle was not the greatest. And interesting, the wood devoured more people than the sword.
If you think about it too, if David only had 4,000, the forest is going to be a much better place to fight. Forest and mountains for them.
True. Yeah.
Who picked this area for battle?
Yeah, it doesn't say.
Well, David is in the town of Menahem. That's what we find in the previous chapter. And he simply sent his men out because Absalom was coming toward him. So where they ended up engaging was not a very good place. They didn't really pick a favorable area to have the fight, in other words.
Well, in a way, it was favorable for David's folks.
Oh, definitely,
That's what I'm
yes.
saying. Less people. You want to have all the places to.
They can use
Duck and
all the-
hide and
They
so
can use
forth.
the terrain to their advantage.
Yes.
They can draw them in.
And we're going to see with Absalom, the terrain was not great for him.
No, certainly not.
So next verse, Absalom met the servants of David. So when they engaged, it's probably chaos because David's got 3 regiments coming toward the enemy. And they engaged. Now Absalom, it says, rode on a mule. And the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak. And his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between heaven and the earth. And the mule that was under him went away. Well, the animal just kept on going. All right.
He was running for his life.
Yeah. So Absalom is trying to get away. It's a treed area, but it's interesting. When I think of oaks, I think of like we have back in Pennsylvania. You got one trunk and you got this huge tree, and I'm thinking, how would you ever get your head stuck way up there? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like piñons and junipers, and they've got these oaks that are like prickly and they're bushes. What's that?
There's so many different types of oak
That's true. I'm thinking of the big ones,
in that area.
but there are, even here in the Southwest, we've got oaks that look more like bushes.
I think a mule will be the best choice if you're going into battle.
They haven't been trimmed.
That's true.
What about the mule?
He probably thought, we got this made. We got a lot more people than David has. He's been on the run.
But the 4,000 are guerrilla fighters in the mountains.
But you remember he took the advice of Hushai, which was, wait, don't go run after David, wait, organize all these people, get them together, and just overwhelm David. So that's what they're doing.
I have an analogous situation. It was like the Russians were fighting in the mountains, and the Russians got their butt kicked. But there were not very many people. They were fighting, and the Russians had, I don't know, thousands of people. I don't know. But then they had a huge force, and they were fighting a very small group of people in the mountains. So, same thing.
Strategy is important. So let's talk about Absalom here. You know, a mule is going to go, if he's headed in a direction, he's going to go under a tree, under a bush. He doesn't care what's on top of him, right? As long as he makes it through. Now, you've heard, oh, it was Absalom's hair that got stuck in the tree. Well, where did that come from? Well, the only way that kind of enters the story, because it doesn't say his hair got stuck. It says his head got caught.
Did they ride mules into battle?
Yes, I guess they did.
There was a lot of mules are more sure-footed.
Had to be a fork in the tree.
Well, so here's the deal. The only reason why people say, oh, his hair got stuck is because back a couple chapters, it said that his hair weighed 2.5 pounds. He cut it once a year, and it was that much. So this guy must have had this huge hair. But he just got his hair cut, and they weighed it, and it was 2.5 pounds. So for his hair to grow that fast, because this is the next event after he gets his hair cut, I kind of doubt his hair was sticking out all over the place. It could have been, but who goes into war with his hair sticking out all over? Unless he's pretty pompous and he thinks, I'm big and bad and all this, and lets his hair, I don't know.
Here's why I think his hair got stuck.
Okay,
He's hanging there for a few minutes.
yeah,
If your neck was there, wouldn't you just go boop and pop down? If your hair's all caught in the branches, it's not as easy.
true. Unless he had a helmet on that was big and pompous, and it got all caught in the pricklers, and who
Then you
knows?
take off your helmet and you're out.
True.
You can't
But
do that with
remember-
your
He
hair.
had long hair and a helmet.
Remember, he's not, this is in the heat of battle. He is not walking and going, oh, let's see, how am I going to get under this tree? Now let's see. Oh, I better duck just a minute because that branch, he is taken off, and it's happening so fast. So whether you want to believe it was his hair, that's fine, but it just says his head. All right. We're not going to argue about whether it was the hair or the head. Whatever it was, it's got him stuck.
Behold, I saw Absalom hanged in an
A
oak.
fork in the tree.
Yeah.
All right. So verse 10. A certain man saw it and told Joab. So they saw this guy dangling in the air, stuck in all these briar bushes, whatever they are. And Joab said to the man, behold, you saw him. Why didn't you smite him? Why didn't you smite him to the ground? Now, notice the integrity of this guy
Yeah.
who saw him, because they have been told, don't hurt him.
Yep.
Isn't he the same Joab from years before?
Yes. So Joab says, why didn't you smite him there to the ground? And then he says, I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a girdle. I would have given you this big old belt, and I would have given you money. Man, I would have rewarded you for taking him
Right
out.
back.
Yeah. Right. And the man said, look what he says, verse 12.
What a great man.
Though I should receive 1,000 shekels. Wait, he had been offered 10. Though I should receive 1,000, see it? Shekels of silver in my hand, yet would I not put forth my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged thee, and Abishai, and Ittai, saying, beware that none touch the young man Absalom. So this guy's got integrity. No, I wouldn't do that, because we were told not to. Otherwise, I should have wrought falsehood against my own life, for there is no matter hid from the king. I wouldn't have gotten away with that. And thou thyself wouldest have set thyself against me.
Yeah.
So the guy's like, no, I wouldn't have done that because you wouldn't have stuck up for me.
And David will find out.
And David will find out.
David will find out.
And no.
It's not worth
Then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. In other words, I'm not going to just stand here talking to you. And he took 3 darts in his hand, thrust them through the heart of Absalom, while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. Now this doesn't kill him, but he's 10 young men, verse 15, that bare Joab's armor, compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. So they finished him off. Joab blew the trumpet. This is important because what's the trumpet for? Well, trumpets can either signify by how many times do or whatever do whatever you do with a trumpet, either advance or run. We're done, every man for himself, whatever. Trumpets are loud enough that they give the warning or the sign of what to do. So he blows the trumpet. Verse 16, the people returned from pursuing after Israel. So he must have blown the trumpet to say, war's over.
We're done.
Their leader is dead, we won. Forget, no more fighting. So they left pursuing Israel. They took Absalom and cast him into a great pit in the wood, and laid a very great heap of stones upon him, and all Israel fled, everyone to his own tent. I find it interesting that the disdain for this Absalom was so great, they just dug a hole and threw him in, threw stones on top. They weren't going to give him the decency of a royal burial.
He had just cost 20,000 Israelites
Yeah.
because of his uprising against his father.
Now here's a little editorial note. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar. Tells where his thoughts are, right? His pride. He had a pillar. This is the Absalom shrine or whatever, memorial, which is in the Kingsdale, for he said, now look what he said here, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and it's called to this day Absalom's place. Now, here's a problem we have with this. Absalom reared up this big monument to himself, the great Absalom, because he says in verse 18, I have no children, or I have no son to keep my name. Hold your place, go back to 1427. 1427.
The column or whatever, is that what people
I
do?
haven't heard of it in other places other than referring to God, monuments and things
Yeah,
like
this
that.
is-
But this guy did it for himself.
Other non-Jewish tribes.
Oh, I'm
do that,
sure they would,
kings
yeah.
And all that stuff. So
Well, yeah, we would make statues, but Jews were not allowed to make a likeness
Right.
of some statue.
But this was a pillar.
1427, what's it say?
3 sons were born to Absalom.
And a daughter.
And a daughter
named Tamar.
whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of a very fair
Interesting.
countenance. This is before. So here's the problem we have. The Bible says Absalom had 3 sons and a daughter. But now he's erected this pillar because he says, I don't have any sons. So you can take it a couple different ways. Maybe at this point they had all died. And he says, I have nobody to pass my name on to, so I'm going to make this big old thing here so everyone will remember me, recognize me. Or it could be he did that before he had the sons and daughters. We don't know. I'm just throwing it out that people that like to find fault with the Bible, they go, oh, mistake, But
Or
there's,
maybe he didn't want his sons to keep remembrance.
well, that's
Because
true.
he just says, I have no son to keep my name in
Yeah,
remembrance.
that's right. So there's ways of reading this, okay? I don't think we should jump to the conclusion, oh, this is an error in the Bible. Or it could be he was such a bad father, his kids didn't even survive. It doesn't say how old these kids were.
They ran off.
Yeah. I mean, he's out trying to take the kingdom away from his father. He's not necessarily being a good dad. So maybe at this point he didn't have sons. We don't know. But I'm just throwing that out that in his pride he built this huge thing to himself. Okay.
Absalom did go into the tents of David's,
Yes, he had done that as part of the judgment God said would
They
happen.
have had any kids?
Well, they could have.
Well, we don't know. It says he had 3 boys and 1 girl, so where'd they come from?
Just saying that he did go into the tents of his brothers.
Yes, yeah. Okay, let's keep reading. Now, this is when they're thinking about how are we going to break the news to David. So Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, he's the guy who was a good runner. Remember, they were the ones that went and told David, "Let me now run and bear the king's tidings, how that the Lord has avenged him of his enemies." And Joab said unto him, now let's figure out why Joab doesn't want him to go. Joab said to him, "You will not bear tidings this day, but thou shalt bear tidings another day. But this day thou shalt bear no tidings, because the king's son is dead." So here's what he basically says. No, you are not going back to David. Not today. Absalom's dead. He's buried in a pit, stones on top of him, but we're not going to tell David. Then Joab said to Cushi, now who is this Cushi guy?
Mine says to a Cushite.
Yeah, he's not a Jew.
He's not a Jew.
Right.
He is probably a servant. Joab says to Cushi, "Go tell the king what thou hast seen." Cushi bowed himself unto Joab and ran. So here's Ahimaaz. He's been told you can't go by Joab. Joab says to this Cushi guy, "You go." What's going on here? And then verse 22, Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said yet again to Joab. In other words, whoa, wait a minute. You let him go, why not me? Right? What's going on? Use your heads. He says, "But howsoever, let me, I pray thee, also run after Cushi." And Joab said, "Wherefore wilt thou run, my son, seeing that thou hast no tidings ready?" Why are you going to go if this is not good news for David? Why do you want to go? It really isn't good news.
David told him.
Yes, it's his enemy, but it's his son. What's that?
I guess I'm getting lost.
Oh. So let me stop a minute. Anybody want to postulate, have any idea why did he want to send Cushi but not Ahimaaz?
He was a servant. David might kill.
Ah, very good.
Right.
You remember what David did to the Amalekite,
Oh, yes.
who came with news of Saul's death? He had him killed.
Obviously, Ahimaaz doesn't know this.
Well, and Ahimaaz is the son of a priest. Now, whether you like it or not, I think Joab made a judgment here. I'd rather send a servant who's not a Jew, because if we lose him, it won't be like losing a priest's son. I hate to say it, but that's what I read
I
into
think
it.
so too.
I think he's making a judgment. What's that?
David do that though?
Did he do it?
Would he?
Yes.
He did it
He
with...
did then, but not, what about? Is that
Okay,
why they're lying to him now?
They're
okay.
not-
All we know is that David did that before.
Yeah.
So will he do it again? We don't know. Well, you can read the rest of the story and
And I
find
think
out.
Joab's saying, let's not take any chances.
Right.
That's what I said.
So Joab doesn't want the priest's son to go tell. Send some servant guy. Some guy we
That
don't
could be
know
the
about.
sacrificial lamb.
Maybe. See, David's in a hard place. I mean, he's had how many years now of his son? He had to run. His son wants to kill him. So, anyway, anybody else have any idea as to why you sent
Why did
Cushai?
Joab do it himself since he was the leader of...
Oh,
Want to be killed?
he.
Besides, also, did the Cushite actually see Joab do it? He doesn't want the report to go back.
Yeah.
But David has to find out some way or another that his son's dead.
Yeah, but Joab is the one who did it,
Yeah.
and he does not want David.
It's possible that the Cushite doesn't know that Joab did it. He
Could
can go
be.
back and say, your son's dead,
Right.
as opposed to Ahimah, who's gonna go back and say, Joab killed your son.
Yeah. That's true. So let's keep going. Verse 24, David sat between the two gates. So he's back at the town, right? And all he knows is that the guys went out to fight. Sat between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate under the wall, and lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man running alone. And the watchman cried and told the king. And the king said, if he be alone, there is tidings in his mouth. In other words, he's coming to tell us something. And he came apace and drew near. And the watchman saw another man running. And the watchman called unto the porter and said, behold, another man is running alone. And the king said, he also brings tidings. Kind of interesting that they're seeing these guys run. And the watchman said, methinketh the running of the foremost is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. So he must have had a certain way of running. You know, I don't know whether he threw his head to one side while he was running. Who knows? But he could tell from a distance, I know who that guy is.
You recognize him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He is a good man and comes with good tidings.
Assumption.
And Ahimaaz called and said to the king, all is well. And he fell down to the earth upon his face before the king and said, blessed be the Lord thy God, which has delivered up the men that lifted up their hand against my lord the king. So what's he say?
You won.
You won. Your enemies have been subdued. Look what David's question is. And the king said, he didn't care about, the news. Oh, we won. Wow, what a great. No. He says, is the young man Absalom safe? Ooh. And Ahimaaz answered,
And lied.
when Joab sent the king's servant and me, thy servant, I saw a great tumult, but I knew not what it was. In other words, all I saw was a bunch of fighting going on and we won. But I don't know how it ended. Is that the truth? Well, you find these humans trying to save their own skin, right? And behold, Cushi came. Cushi said, tidings, my lord the king, for the Lord has avenged thee this day of all them that rose up against thee. Kind of the same thing. And the king said to Cushi, is the young man Absalom safe? And Cushi answered, the enemies of my lord the king and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt be as that young man is. In other words, the enemies met their doom just like that young man. Well, David knew exactly what that meant.
Yeah.
Kind of roundabout way of saying it, right? And the king was much moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went thus, he said, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom. Then he says, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. Okay, we find David weeping. What's he weeping for? Well, he's weeping primarily for his son. He lost his son. But he's also weeping because his own leaders, who he had instructed very clearly, do not hurt Absalom, have failed him. So there's a lot of sadness here. There's also another point. Think about this. David has now gotten basically to the end of what the prophet had told him. Remember when the prophet Nathan came to him and said, hey, there's a guy who had a guest come, and rather than take his own sheep, he took another guy's sheep. He had plenty of sheep, but he took, remember that? And he goes, you're the man. And then he told him what was going to happen. There's going to be fighting, and your women are going to be taken away. There's going to be chaos in your kingdom. among your family. I mean, we can go back and see that. Look at it. Let's go back to 2 Samuel 12, because I want you to see that David, I believe, is seeing the completion of everything God said would happen. 2 Samuel 12, verse 10. Let's read it again. This is when Nathan the prophet came and said, "You are the man. Now therefore," this is 2 Samuel 12:10. "Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thy house, because you despised me and has taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to thy wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house." Who's that? That's Absalom. "And I will take thy wives before thine eyes and give them unto thy neighbor. He shall lie with thy wives in the sight of the sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, before the sun." So remember, this is what God said was going to happen. So this is basically the fulfillment. He's got chaos going on in his family. Remember with Tamar and all that? His own kids. He's got his own son trying to take the kingdom away. And so he has to run into exile. And his wives taken away. So now that Absalom has died, it's like the whole thing came to a conclusion. The chastisement that God brought on him because of his actions has now been completed.
It's all his fault.
And who else is to blame but him? Okay. So there's reasons why he's weeping at this point. He's weeping because it has hit him, I think, all at once. This is exactly what God said was happening. So God used the hand of an evil son to punish David. You know, in the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah was writing about Israel being taken away into captivity. Chastisement of God on the nation of Israel. And I think it's Jeremiah 17. I'll have to look it up. But he says, God says, "Nebuchadnezzar, my servant, will do this. Take you away into captivity." Nebuchadnezzar, my servant. Nebuchadnezzar was a heathen king. But God used the heathen king for his own purposes to bring chastisement on Israel. And this is another example. God brought a wicked son. Now, he didn't make him do it. Remember, we've talked about human will and God's sovereignty. Did Absalom know he was fulfilling God's promise to David by doing all this? No, he just acted out his own feelings, right? He acted out his rebellion. But God used that to chastise David. So here we have David saying, "Oh, my son, Absalom, my son, would God," thought about this, "would God I had died for thee." You know, instead of dying for Absalom, why didn't he just live for him? Why didn't he be the father he should have been? Now he said, "I wish I could have died for you." No, he should have lived for him. He should have trained that boy. He raised an undisciplined son who had no concern for the things of God. That's what he should have done. All right, you all following me here? Am I being a little harsh on David?
Even after David's kingdom only survived one more king.
Yeah.
Solomon after
Right.
that.
Then it was
Kingdom
split.
still
Right.
split.
That's true.
Do as I do, do as you say.
Right.
But Absalom stood up for his sister, right?
Yeah.
There were some good things, yes, obviously. He stood up for Tamar. I wrote this point down. See if you can follow. Absalom was successful until he fulfilled God's plan. And then God...
Until?
Right. Until he fulfilled God's plan. He was successful in bringing all this calamity on David's nation, his family, the destruction. Think of all he brought, the embarrassment. But when God's judgment, chastisement on David was done, Absalom's done. And you know what? God fulfilled his promise too. God said this is what's going to happen, and it happened all the way to the end. That among his own family, there would rise up this rebellion. God said it would happen. Did he make Absalom do it? No. But you know, I've said this before. Isn't this an amazing thing, how God can take the evil of the world and use it for good? It's an amazing thing. He can take the evil of the world and use it for his own good. Man doing his own thing, fulfilling his own desires, has no idea that God is using him in God's plan. But that's a God thing. No, we can't do that. Only God can do that. Are you all following me here?
Yeah.
So here we have David weeping up in this chamber. He goes up there and weeps. Oh, Absalom, my son Absalom. He cared for him, but sadly his care didn't go far enough to reach out and do something about his son. He just let it go.
When God was done with Absalom, he took him.
Right. That's true.
Sounds like King David also probably felt guilt as a
Yeah.
father. This shows his failure as a father. Maybe that guilt is also part of who I feel that angst.
And that and the remorse for the original sin, that I know that he knew
Yeah.
that this was all a part of the consequences of that.
Right.
I
Like
think
I said,
probably a lot of his failure as a father.
right. Like I said, he's the only one to blame.
He never dealt with that sin.
Right.
I mean, he apologized. He said he was sorry to God,
Yeah, God forgave.
but clearly he never dealt with it in a way that, he just carried it with him, I think. He just kind of carried it with him, and it kept him from being a disciplinarian to his kids and all those things.
And you
Like
know,
that story you told us about the Mexican guy that went back home.
oh, that's right. He chose to be an example. And I don't want to oversimplify child rearing,
Of course.
but you know how it is when kids are little, you pretty much make all the decisions for them. But there comes a point when they begin to take on their own responsibilities. But as a parent, you never lose that right to speak truth into their life. Never. No matter what age, you can still speak as a parent. Doesn't mean you boss them around.
And it doesn't mean they'll listen.
It doesn't
Right.
mean they're going to do it either.
It doesn't mean. But we can't give up. And I think that's what David did. I think David was not involved in the child rearing of his son.
Didn't have time.
And I think at this point, just let it go.
Well, how many wives and how many children?
Well,
And,
That's true.
Maybe to him, all these wives are almost like, he was a king, he probably had a stable full of horses, this is like a stable full of women, and they're rearing all these children. Wow.
The thing
Right.
is, Absalom should have been
They're all
the
competing.
heir.
yeah.
And so you would think that if he was going to do anything with any of his kids, the heir to the kingdom would be the one that you'd spend
Right.
the time with.
You'd
that
focus
much.
on.
Train them
Right.
to be the heir.
So I just want to encourage you all. I hope I haven't stepped on toes, but if you're a parent, you always have that right to speak truth into the life of your kids. Don't give up like David did. It doesn't mean you boss them around and hit them over the head with the Bible and all this. But when you have opportunity, speak into their life. Yeah, you're done probably raising them when they were little and all that. I understand that.
But it's disheartening if they don't listen.
But you know what? When they don't listen, that's between them and God.
The word of the Lord will not return void.
Right? It will do
We may not
something.
see the
Right.
And,
Yeah.
I think the older they are, the more they understand, the more the seed is planted.
Yeah.
But when they're young, it seems like it goes one ear out the other.
Well,
But don't give up, is what I'm saying. Don't
have
give
much in
up.
between to stop it.
I also think that this speaks to not letting your own screw-ups color
Absolutely.
everything that you do so much that you lose, that you assume that you've lost your moral authority and therefore
Right.
you just don't use it.
That's true. Yeah, because we've said, you know, where was David when this happened to Tamar? Well, he probably thought, I messed up. How can I say anything to this son who's messed up? I did the same thing, you know? But yeah, don't let that color what you're saying. You know, we can ask forgiveness
Or
and move.
use it
Yeah.
to color what you're saying, you know?
Ask forgiveness and move
Doesn't always
on.
work, but
Right.
he said, you know, it's.
But my encouragement to us is don't give up. It's so easy to just say, oh, well, you know, whatever. They're adults, they'll do it. Speak the truth into their life, no matter what age. Find those opportunities.
You know, you don't have to speak directly to them. You speak in prayer over.
Right.
Sometimes you can say it over and over and over till you're blue in the face, and they're gonna still do it.
No, we may not see it.
But you can't, you know, all you can do is control what you do, not what they do.
Right. That's right. That's why I said it's between them and God. Once you've said what you can, leave it there.
I think it's funny when they start trying to tell you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like you haven't been around the block, right?
That's right.
Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. All right. Very good. Well, we're going to read chapter 19 next week, so let's pray. Lord God, we thank you for this story. Thank you that the judgment was completed, that you kept